So, have you ever felt completely stuck inside your own head? Like you're just
Yeah.
wishing you could find an off switch for your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely.
Or maybe on the flip side, you've just, marveled at what your mind can actually do.
Yeah, that too. It's quite something.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. This idea, this concept of how our unique ability to think about ourselves, our self awareness, is this amazing gift, but also sometimes a really profound burden.
Hmm.
We're talking about the terrible paradox of self-awareness. And at its core, it's more than just, thinking about yourself. It's this very human thing, being able to see ourselves as separate, distinct individuals.
Right, distinct from the environment, from others. It's a uniquely high trait in humans.
It's basically the spark for everything, isn't it? Consciousness, creativity, our sense of identity, purpose.
Yeah, it lets us plan, feel empathy, think long term.
It's how we reflect, how we grow, how we evolve. Things no other species really does
Yeah.
in the same way.
And this is the big but. That's where the paradox really bites. Because that same self-awareness, it makes us painfully aware of our own mortality, our limits, things we regret, feeling alone even in a crowd.
Mm.
It's what fuels that sort of existential dread, anxiety, depression sometimes, identity crises, overthinking everything.
Yeah, the dreaded overthinking loop.
Right. And even self-sabotage. Ernest Becker, who wrote a lot about this, he put it really starkly.
What did he say?
He said, the human condition is tragic, not because we are doomed to suffer, but because we know that we suffer.
That really hits home, doesn't it?
It does. It captures that knowing aspect.
Okay, so how do we even start to unpack something this big, this fundamental? So in this deep dive, we're going to explore, where this idea comes from, historically, philosophically.
And psychologically, too, how it shows up in our minds.
Right, and even in our brains, the actual wiring, we'll look at what people are saying about it, out there in public forums, media.
And crucially, how people cope. Because we all have to deal with this double-edged sword somehow.
Exactly. We'll be drawing on insights from all over: philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, what people are saying online, recent articles. Should be fascinating.
Definitely.
So let's maybe start at the beginning, the philosophical roots. Where does this idea of self-awareness as a potential problem first pop up?
Well, you can go way back. Think ancient Greece, Socrates.
Know thyself.
Exactly. Sounds like solid advice, right? The path to wisdom.
Seems like it should be.
But for many, digging deep like that, it often leads to, well, discontent. The more you know yourself, maybe the more flaws you see, or the more unanswerable questions pop up.
So knowing isn't always comforting.
Not always. And then you've got someone like Nietzsche. He kind of saw consciousness itself as this heavy weight, this burden.
How so?
He contrasted us with animals who he thought lived more freely, just being, without this constant self-analysis weighing them down.
Living in the moment, I guess.
Sort of. And fast forward a bit, you get Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist. He took it even further.
What was his take?
He argued that self-awareness traps us in what he called bad faith.
Bad faith.
Yeah, like living inauthentically, denying our own freedom or responsibility, because the weight of truly choosing, of being radically free, is just too much. So we adopt roles, follow the crowd, anything to escape that burden.
Wow. Okay. That's heavy.
It is. And what's really fascinating is how these philosophical ideas sort of ripple through into psychology.
Right. So how does psychology tackle this? Does it just echo the philosophers, or does it add its own layer?
It definitely adds its own layers, its own frameworks. Think about Freud, for instance.
Okay, conscious versus unconscious.
Exactly. That whole model is built on this idea of internal conflict, a conflict that self-awareness basically brings to the surface, a constant battle within us.
Between what we want and what we think we should want, maybe?
Partly, yes. And then you have Carl Rogers, a humanist psychologist. He talked about our self-concept, how we see ourselves.
Our internal picture.
Right. And he found that when there's a big gap, a mismatch between that picture and, reality, that's a major source of suffering.
But I guess facing that mismatch, that pain, could also be how we grow. Like it forces you to adjust the picture.
That's a really important point, yes.
Yeah.
The discomfort, the suffering from that mismatch can absolutely be the catalyst for change, for growth. It makes us confront reality.
Okay.
And then there's a really interesting theory called terror management theory, or TMT.
Terror management sounds intense.
It kind of is. It looks directly at how we humans deal with the fact that we know we're going to die, that existential terror.
Which is a direct result of self-awareness.
Precisely. And TMT suggests we manage this terror by creating and believing in cultural worldviews, religions, striving for legacy. Things that give us a sense of meaning, significance, maybe even symbolic immortality, something that lasts beyond our physical selves.
So we build these big systems to basically distract ourselves or make peace with the inevitable.
In a way, yeah, to give life meaning in the face of mortality. What's fascinating here is how fundamental that drive seems to be.
Okay, this is making sense from a philosophical and psychological view, but you mentioned neuroscience earlier. How does this actually look inside the brain? Where does self-awareness live, neurologically speaking?
Right, yeah, let's get into the brain itself. Because it's not just abstract, our brains are physically structured for this. The prefrontal cortex is a huge player here.
The CEO of the brain, right?
Yeah.
Planning, decisions.
Exactly. Social behavior, complex thought.
Hmm.
But it's also ground zero for this deep self-reflection, this ability to think about ourselves. And that makes us vulnerable to the burdens we've been talking about.
So the same part that lets us plan a project also lets us worry ourselves sick about it.
You got it. And it goes deeper. There's something called the default mode network, the DMN.
Okay, what's that?
Think of it as your brain's internal narrator. It's active when you're not focused on the outside world, when your mind wanders. It's constantly weaving stories about your past, future, identity, what others think of you.
So daydreaming central.
Sort of, but it's more self-focused than just random daydreaming. And when this network gets stuck in overdrive, that's when you get rumination.
Ah, the endless loop.
Yeah, that obsessive, often negative self-talk. Replaying mistakes, worrying about the future. It's very common in things like depression and anxiety.
That sounds exhausting. Is that default mode network always bad news then? Or can that me network be useful sometimes? Maybe for creativity or something?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
No, it's not inherently bad at all. It's absolutely essential for self-reflection, for understanding ourselves, planning our future, even creativity, like you said. The issue is balance and maybe the tone of the narration.
Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting, especially when you look at, say, mindfulness research.
Right. Mindfulness is often suggested as a way to deal with overthinking.
It is, and it often helps. But some studies show something surprising, just increasing self-focus, becoming more aware of your internal state without also developing emotional regulation skills and self-compassion. That can actually be detrimental.
Wait, really? So just noticing your thoughts isn't enough?
It might not be, or could even backfire for some. If you just shine a brighter spotlight on negative thoughts and feelings without having the tools to manage them or the kindness towards yourself to accept them.
You just feel worse, but with more clarity.
Kind of, yeah. It can become this echo chamber of self-criticism. It highlights the need not just for awareness, but for a different relationship with that awareness. More gentle, less judgmental.
That makes a lot of sense. So, okay, bringing this down to earth, how does this paradox actually affect you, the listener, day to day? We've touched on it, but let's lay out the pros and cons.
Definitely. It's a real two-sided coin in everyday life.
So on the plus side, self-awareness is obviously key for growth, right?
Yeah.
Looking back, learning from mistakes, figuring out what you want.
Absolutely. Goal setting relies on it knowing your strengths, weaknesses. Emotional intelligence, too. Understanding your own feelings helps you understand others.
And accountability. You can't really take responsibility if you're not aware of your own actions and their impact.
True. These are the powerful gifts of self-awareness.
But then there's the other side, the shadow side.
Relentless self-criticism is a big one, just magnifying every little flaw.
And that leads straight to paralysis by analysis, doesn't it? Thinking so much you can't actually do anything.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there, right? Staring at that empty document trying to craft the perfect opening line.
And an hour later, still nothing, just anxiety.
Exactly. Anxiety, guilt about the past, worry about the future. That's fueled by this awareness, too. And shame, feeling inadequate.
Imposter syndrome, feeling like a fraud even when you're successful.
Yep, all tangled up in excessive, often critical self-awareness. That paralysis by analysis is often driven by a deep fear of not being good enough, which comes right back to that self-criticism.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really can be. And, if we zoom out again, you see these exact struggles playing out everywhere in public conversations.
Like where? Online forums.
Definitely. Go on places like Reddit, Quora, look in subreddits about philosophy, existentialism, even mental health communities like depression. You see so many people talking about the pain of knowing too much.
What kind of things do they say?
Things like, I wish I could just be blissfully ignorant again, like when I was a kid, or I didn't worry about death or the meaning of life back then. There's a sense that knowing more just leads to more questions you can't answer.
And feeling isolated because of it.
Yeah, that comes up a lot. Even though awareness helps us understand others, people often feel very alone inside their own heads with their
Yes.
own specific anxieties and thoughts.
Hmm.
And you even see public figures talking about this. People on Twitter X, like, say, Jordan Peterson, Naval Ravikant, Ali Abdaal, they often discuss trying to find that balance
Balance between what?
between self-awareness and just getting on with things, taking action. They warn about getting stuck in meta thinking.
Thinking about thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Analyzing your own thoughts to the point where you're completely detached from actually living or doing anything. It becomes unproductive, just an endless loop.
That sounds exhausting and definitely something I think a lot of us can relate to. And the media picks up on this too, right? It's not just niche online discussions.
Oh, for sure. Mainstream media covers it quite a bit. Psychology Today often has articles linking high introspection, maybe even high IQ, with a greater risk for certain mental health challenges.
Because they think more, see more complexity, maybe more potential problems.
That seems to be the idea. Then you had things like that BBC documentary looking at teenagers.
Yes, when self-awareness is really kicking into high gear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it explored why they're often more prone to anxiety, comparing themselves to peers constantly, trying to figure out who they are. It's a vulnerable time for this paradox.
And social media probably doesn't help with the comparison aspect.
Definitely not. Which leads to things like that New York Times article, The Cost of Being Too Self-Conscious. It directly connected rising depression rates, especially in young adults, to this constant digital self-comparison, always curating an image, always seeing curated images of others. It ramps up that self-reflective pressure enormously.
Okay, wow. So it's clear this is a really widespread, significant challenge. Which brings us to the big question. What do we do about it? How do people actually navigate this? How do you cope?
Right, the practical side. And thankfully, there are tools, strategies people use.
Look, mindfulness and meditation, you mentioned that earlier.
Yes, those are huge. The goal there is often to reduce the grip of overthinking. Not necessarily to stop thoughts, but to notice them without getting swept away, bringing focus back to the present moment, creating a bit of space.
Okay, creating distance. What else?
Creative expression is another powerful one. Turning that internal awareness, the thoughts, the feelings, into something external. Art, music, writing.
Getting it out, basically.
Exactly. Processing it by giving it form. Then there's spirituality or religion. For many people, that provides immense comfort for those big existential fears, offering meaning, purpose, connection to something larger.
A framework to hold the difficult questions.
Precisely. And also helping others, shifting the focus from me to we, getting involved in community, acts of service. That can create a really strong sense of purpose and connection, counteracting feelings of isolation.
That makes sense. Takes you out of your own head for a bit.
It really does. And even something simple like journaling.
Just writing things down.
Yeah, it helps channel all that reflection into something more structured, maybe clearer. Getting the jumble of thoughts out onto the page can bring surprising clarity.
Those are all really practical things. Are there any key books or thinkers people could turn to if they want to go deeper on this?
Oh, definitely. We mentioned Ernest Becker already. His book, The Denial of Death, is a classic on this.
Right, the terror management idea.
Yeah. Then there's Viktor Frankl's man's Search for Meaning. He wrote about finding purpose even in the absolute worst circumstances, based on his experience in concentration camps. Incredibly powerful.
A different angle on meaning making.
Yes. For the neuroscience side, Antonio Damasio's Self comes to mind. Is fascinating how the brain builds our sense of self.
Okay.
And for dealing with the overthinking mind, Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now is hugely popular. And Susan Cain's Quiet is wonderful for understanding introversion and the inner world, the strengths and challenges of that kind of deep awareness.
Great recommendations. Thinking about all this, it raises a question about culture. Do different cultures handle this paradox differently?
That's a really insightful question. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. There are quite different approaches.
Like East versus West, is that too simplistic?
It's a bit simplistic, but there's a general trend. Many Eastern philosophies, like Buddhism or Taoism, lean towards cultivating, maybe ego-less awareness.
Egoless, meaning getting rid of the self.
Not exactly getting rid of it, but changing your relationship to it. Being aware of your thoughts and feelings, but without strong attachment or identification. Seeing them as passing events like clouds in the sky, rather than the fundamental you. Less clinging.
Ah, okay. Aware, but not fused with the thoughts.
Exactly. Which is quite different from a lot of Western thought, which has historically placed a huge emphasis on introspection, on defining a strong, unique individual identity, asking, who am I? Finding yourself.
Which can be empowering.
Definitely empowering. But that intense focus on the individual self can also lead to more comparison, more potential for ego clashes, maybe more isolation if that identity feels fragile or flawed.
So different paths, different potential pitfalls.
You could say that. It highlights that there isn't one single right way to navigate this.
It really feels like, boiling it all down, this whole concept of self-awareness is just fundamentally a double-edged sword, isn't it?
That's a perfect way to put it.
Our awareness makes us human, capable of amazing things, understanding, connection, creation, but it also makes us uniquely fragile.
Vulnerable to our own knowledge.
And that constant self-reflection, it can lead to incredible wisdom and growth, or it can just trap you in anxiety.
Wisdom or worry, yeah.
Knowing we're mortal drives us to build legacies, find meaning, or it just paralyzes us with dread.
The drive or the dread.
And even though we can understand others so deeply because of it, we can still feel totally alone in our own minds.
That's the paradox in a nutshell. Profound connection potential, profound isolation potential.
So what's the takeaway then?
I think a good analogy is that self-awareness is like fire.
Okay.
You can warm your house, cook your food, provide light, or it can burn the whole thing down. It depends entirely on how you manage it.
How you tend the flame.
Exactly. So to live meaningfully with this double-edged sword, you really have to find that balance. Balance the awareness with action.
Don't just think, do.
Right? And balance it with compassion for yourself, first and foremost, and for others who are wrestling with the same paradox. And find a sense of purpose that guides you through the noise.
And I think it's important to remember, for anyone listening, that it's completely normal to feel overwhelmed sometimes by your own mind. We all do.
Absolutely. It's part of the human package deal.
But it's also possible to learn how to shape it gently, to guide it rather than be dragged around by it.
That's the hope and the work.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. How might really understanding this paradox, seeing both the gift and the burden clearly, how might that change the way you relate to your own thoughts, your own awareness day to day? How can you start harnessing its incredible power without getting burned by its intensity?